Mm.
Hi, are you okay?
Hello, I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, this is Zara. So, Zara, I just want you to really briefly, well, no, not it doesn't have to be briefly at all. Introduce yourself, and sort of we'll do this at the beginning and at the end. The name of
Hmm.
Instagram, sort of where people can find you, and a little bit about what you do. And then obviously we'll sort of move on from there.
Yeah, my name's Zahra. I'm actually a children's nurse by background, but I've trained as a life coach, and I'm really excited. So I've literally just started, so I'm really excited to actually start working with clients. Um, my niche is mums who have children, neurodiverse children. So I've got two boys. One of them, he's going to be 13 next month, and a 6-year-old. So my older son, he's got ADHD, autism, and tics.
Right.
And he's the reason why I'm decided to retrain as a coach and start this journey.
So I guess you've got some really unique insights into managing day-to-day life. But also, before I do go on, you don't look old enough to have a 13-year-old.
Thank you. I'm older than I look.
But you don't look old enough. So, where is the best place for people to find you if they want to reach out and have a conversation and, just sort of find out about your experiences and your journey?
So my Instagram page, which is coach.zahra, that's spelled Zahra. Also, I'm a co-author of a book, which is going to be the book that I'm in is coming out the end of the month. So it's called Turn Your Mess into Your Message. So it's like a group of people that have been through like challenges in their life and have turned things around, and we've all written a chapter in the book.
What an amazing thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many people are there?
In the book.
Yeah.
I'm not sure altogether. I think there's quite a lot because they had to section it into two. So the first book's already come out, and I'm not sure off the top of my head how many authors, but then yeah, the second one's at the end of the month.
Okay, cool.
So
Well,
I'll be in the second one.
we'll put a plug in for that at the end of the post when we post the video. Absolutely, and obviously to your page
Yeah.
as well. So I what are the one of the first things that I saw that you had posted was back on the 3rd of November, and it was what caught my attention, and it's what made me reach out to you.
Hmm.
Post that you had put on about schools, when the school would ring you and you'd see the school's number come up and you would know instantly what the call was going to be, and it was going to be about your son and how the school wasn't able not to cope, but they don't have the necessary perhaps training or whatever to handle the challenges that your son was facing. And I read the post, and I have quite a few friends who have been in that same situation, that are almost certainly still in that same situation, that don't really understand what their rights are or even know what they can and can't do. And I really wanted to talk to you about that because I think it's a really important message to get out there.
Yeah. So I've been dealing with that, I'd say, since nursery. So he's actually in year 8 now. So it's been a long time. Some of it he hasn't even been in school. So I'll go back. Like I'll start from the beginning so it makes sense. So I'd say from around the age of 2, could kind of notice he was a little bit different to other 2-year-olds, and I just thought, oh, it's terrible twos, it will pass. The tantrums and kind of, yeah, normal toddler behavior, but a little bit more extreme, where the nursery's calling me and saying, oh, he did this or he snatched that, or it was just like constant complaints. So I thought, okay, well, maybe as he grows older, he'll manage better, we'll manage better. But then he started school reception, and it was literally every week. um they'd be looking for me at the end of that. I used to hate going to pick him up from school. I'd be so anxious because I could see the teachers looking for me. We
Yeah.
need to have a meeting. He did this today. He doesn't sit still. He shouts out the answers. He hit someone. He said a swear word. And it was almost, they were blaming me. They were saying, why does he do this? What happens at home? And it was just quite humiliating, embarrassing. And then as school went on, it got worse. And then in what year was he? In year 3, things were quite quite bad. They said, we are concerned that we may need to exclude him because
Right.
he's getting worse. And I couldn't understand why, because there wasn't any like issues going on at home, or I certainly wasn't teaching him how to swear or to hit
Oh
people.
no.
And the school would actually, I used to feel a little bit like they're interrogating me, like the deputy head teacher would ask me all sorts of questions. And yeah, they wouldn't think outside the box, like maybe he's got some sort of need. So then I took him to the GP and I asked for a CAMS referral. And initially they called me up, they've got a little background, and they said, oh, we'll discuss him in the MDT meeting and we'll get back to you.
What's an MDT meeting?
Oh, sorry, so that's the multidisciplinary team. So they'd all, doctors, nurses, and whoever works in CAMS would come together and discuss like what I've told them.
Right.
And then I didn't hear anything, and I contacted them and they said, oh yeah, we've discharged him. So they discharged him without even seeing him. We happened to move house at that time though, so we moved borough.
Right.
So I then moved school. So I was like, maybe a new school, new start, with these threats of exclusion, it will be all right. So he was in year 4 at this point, and I got him into the new borough CAMS that we were in. So they were a little bit better, but there are long waiting lists and things. But I did tell the school I'm suspecting he's got ADHD or something's going on here. Yeah. And it was the same story with that school, to be honest with you. They'd call me all the time. Sometimes I'd be at work and they'd call me, oh, we've lost him. We don't know where he is in the school. Can you come and get him? We don't accept this kind of behavior in this school. Because he would, for example, like sitting in class and he'd start throwing pencils at children. It's like, it's the focus that he couldn't do. He couldn't sit still and sit and do work, or he didn't finish his work, so we didn't let him go out to break, which is obviously not the right thing to do, because he's got ADHD, loads of energy. If you're not letting him have playtime, he's not going to sit in class. But back then, obviously, I didn't know what I know now, and we didn't have any kind of diagnosis. It was all suspected, and the school kept saying, no, we don't think he's got ADHD. He knows what he's doing. He's choosing to do this behavior. Finally, he got diagnosed with ADHD. I want to say it was around the end of year 4, the beginning of year 5.
Right.
And then I didn't know anything about, they give you the diagnosis and then it's like, all right, get on with it. And I wasn't keen to just put him straight on medication. So I said, I'd rather try strategies at home, at school, that we can try and manage. I didn't want like medication, because he was very young, to be the first thing that we go to. And then things were getting worse. Actually, the school were calling me a lot more.
Right.
And it was really getting to the point where I was feeling like, I think I'm gonna have to stop working, because how do you keep having to just say, oh, I've got to go pick my son up? And it was taking over my life to the point where I was getting really anxious. I was getting really low in mood. I got signed off work for a little bit, because I wasn't able to think straight. Like, it was just totally consuming me.
I just interject just for a second? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do you think that is it the downfall? Do you think the problem is that the teachers are not trained to know what to look for? Or do you think it is based around, do you think the problem lies with our educational system, in that they're not trained to understand and to know? Or do you think that the lack of, what word am I looking for? The lack of realizing something's not right falls with our NHS? Is it the schools? Is it your doctors? Where do you think that it falls?
I think it's within the education system, personally. From what I can only speak from my experience. There's probably some great schools out there that have, caught on early, and because schools can refer to CAMS as well. But through my experience from the schools he's been to, it's always been like, blame the mum,
right,
rather than, So for me, it has started within the school system, because actually then when he was in year 5, I had a really good relationships with CAMS actually, and I had a specialist CAMS teacher, and she offered to go into the school and work with the school and to show them strategies on how you manage certain behavior. How do you get him to sit when he needs incorporate movement breaks, so that when he is sitting, he can be productive and get on with his work, and maybe then he won't be throwing pencils at people. And you know, things like that. And the school actually said to Cams that, oh no, we're managing him perfectly fine, we've got no issues now, no concerns. So Cams called me, we had a meeting with the doctor, the nurse, the Cams teacher, and they said, oh yeah, we're going to close, you know, we're going to discharge him now because school have reported like things are going really well. And I just thought, but they call me every day, so clearly there's something weird going on here. So Cams were really good. They did take on board what I said, and then they went into the school to have a face, because bearing in mind around that time was sort of all the COVID stuff, so a lot of it couldn't be face to face. But then once they could go into the school, they had a meeting, this time with his class teacher and the Senko, and they said, actually, we're really struggling and we'd really appreciate your help coming to you know, show us how to manage him better. But now we were at the end of year 5, so it was like, well, we've got to wait for the beginning of year 6.
Right.
The beginning of year 6 came, and he was in school for, I want to say, 6, not long, it was September time, basically. I can't remember exactly how many weeks, but they called me in, the head teacher and the deputy head teacher, and he said, we want to send him to a pupil referral unit for a 6-week placement because they will help him manage his emotions, because one of his biggest struggles is like emotional regulation.
Right, okay.
He really struggles to regulate. I mean, if something upsets him, he's gonna explode pretty quickly. And I was reluctant to send him there because I'm not a fan of those places, because as with my work as a nurse, I actually work in the young offenders.
Right, okay.
And a lot of our boys do come from pupil referral units, and when I speak to them and read through their notes, it's a very similar path to what my son's been down, and they do have some underlying need which wasn't diagnosed until later on, and then they get put in the PRU and they get labeled as bad, so then they start believing that they're bad, and then they're mixing with all sorts of, you know, different people, and they end up down the wrong path, and it's this sort of PRU to prison pipeline. So I was really sorry.
No, I apologize for interrupting, but it's quite scary that that's a thing, that there's actually a saying for that actually this system that is put in place to help young children regulate themselves that can't manage that is actually pushing them in a completely different direction. There's some serious failings.
There are a lot of failings, and I really didn't realize until I like progressed, and at each stage I was just challenging everything. So I mean, the way they put it to me is, if you don't agree for us to send him to the PRU for 6 weeks, we're going to permanently exclude him, and when you permanently get excluded, you end up in the PRU anyway, but permanently. So I was pushed into a corner. I said, okay, well, let's try. I said, will he come back to your school? They said, yeah, it's only 6 weeks and then he'll come back. So, oh, okay, let's try. He went there and things just got 10 times worse.
Right.
And that point, I was like, I can't even manage him at home anymore.
Right.
And they were calling me, for example, I'd drop him off and an hour later they're calling me, you need to come and get him because we can't manage him. And I'd say, yeah, but I'm, you know, somewhere else. I'm shopping, or I'm with my other son. I can't just magic myself. I don't sit outside your school gates waiting for you to call me. And it would be a case of, then they'd keep calling me until I'd get there and they'd say, take him home. And I used to think, what? I was told they're specialists and they're going to help. And I just couldn't understand. Well, I could understand because my biggest fears were coming true.
Yeah.
And then I was pushing with them, please let him go back to his mainstream school. It's literally just year 6. We'll start again in year 7, because I didn't know anything about educational healthcare plans, EHCPs,
Right.
which is something that you can apply for. They're not very easy to get, and you do need the support of the school to because it's a lot of paperwork and reports and all of that, and it gives the school funding so that they can implement more for the child. So it could be that they need a one-to-one, or they need a specialist school, even because it comes from the local authority. And actually, I forgot to say, going back, I tried to apply for one of those once he got his ADHD diagnosis, and of course I need support from the school, and the school were like, he doesn't need that, you're wasting your time. They did it because I started it, so they had to obviously finish it, but they done it very half-heartedly, so it went to panel at the local authority and it just got rejected.
Right.
And then it was the cam when the cam's teacher, sorry, I'm going back now, I hope it's not getting confusing. when the
Yeah.
when the cam's teacher went into school at the end of year 5 to say, listen, mum said that you're calling her all the time, what's going on, can we support you? She did say to them, also, you need to reapply for the EHCP because there's no way this child is going to get through school without one.
Yeah.
So at that point, because she said it, and off the record, she told me they still didn't want to do it, but she pushed them. They did it properly this time, and it went to panel, and it was approved, and he got a high level of funding as well.
So they
So
wasted
he needed it all along. Yeah.
just because they couldn't be asked.
Yeah, basically. They couldn't be asked. And then he was at the Pro, and I know that's when I actually had to stop working because I'd just got a new job as an immunization nurse, because it would have worked perfectly with my kids, because it was in school, so it was within school hours, and I was so excited to start this. Although I've worked at the prison, I've started there 15 years ago, so I'm always sort of in and out working there, but I wanted to do something different, and I didn't get to start because it all fell apart the moment they put him in the Pro. So that got me down, because I've always worked whatever's been going on, not full time, but I've always managed to, it's a bit of escapism from what's going on in your own world as well.
I was going to say to you that it must have really taken a massive toll on your mental health, your relationship, your data. I think parents get forgotten in these situations.
Yeah.
You get a lot of blame, a lot of questioning that is sounding like blame, and actually try and get support. It doesn't come, and then there's more blame, and that must be
exactly
for you as a parent to deal with.
It was really, really hard, and I think a really lonely place to be, was because I was doing it on my own, and also being like the sole provider for the kids, and it's like you are actually stopping me from going to work because you're forcing me to send him to a Pro where the hours are shorter and there's no kind of aftercare or anything, because I used to rely on aftercare when he was in the mainstream school, and there was no consideration, there was nothing. It was like, well, sort of like not our problem. They didn't say that, but that's the kind of attitude that I felt from them. And then I raised all my concerns about him being in the Pro, but nobody was listening at that point. And then it got to 6 weeks and they extended it because the school had realized that he's getting worse, because they report back to the primary school. So I think that they just didn't want him back because they thought, oh gosh, he's a handful. And at this point, the EHCP thing was still going through, so we hadn't got an answer yet or funding or anything like that. So they were trying to keep him there, I think, for all of year 6. So they thought, oh, then he's not our problem. But I pushed and pushed and pushed. I was like, no, this place is not serving him. I mean, the head teacher used to refer to him as a gangster, and it would really upset him.
And you,
it would upset me. But his upset is like, I'm gonna kick the door, I'm gonna kick your bin over, I'm gonna damage something, as he wasn't getting the support for so long from school. And at that point, at home he was manageable, but then he was becoming unmanageable at home as well. And I just thought, it just feels like your world's just caving in on you. What do I do now? I wasn't coping very well at that point. And then pushed to get him back into mainstream. They finally agreed on a sort of like integration, slowly get him back in. And they gave him 3 days, which was 2-hour days, so not even half days, it's altogether 6 hours. And on that 3rd day, they permanently excluded him.
Right.
And the head teacher didn't even call me. So part of the process of when you permanently exclude a student, the head teacher is supposed to call the parent like straight away and let them know. And I found out through external sources, because they'd obviously told other professionals first, who had reported back to me like he's been permanently excluded. So then finally spoke to the head teacher about it. And then that's when like the real battle kind of started. So it went to, I wrote it down. I can't remember what it's called. So I went to the governors. So you go to a sort of like an appeal, like a meeting. So you sit with the governors, and whether the school governors is biased, the whole system is there. It's just a failure, because of course they're going to side with the school, they work for the school, but they make the decision. I didn't understand it, but I went to that to kind of argue my case on why he shouldn't be excluded and why this is unfair. We're still waiting for his EHCP to come through. Like, you're really just failing him. And then the outcome from that was the governors decided to uphold the head's decision, which was to keep him excluded. So then I started refusing to send him to school, to the Prue, because I said, why am I going to send him somewhere that has actually made this whole situation 10 times worse, when he could have been in his mainstream school with Cam's support helping them while we waited for the EHCP to come through, and then they would have got the funding, and then they could have done more, like got a one-to-one, or whatever the professionals decided that he needed. But it was their kind of quick fix, just exclude him and put him back into the Prue. And then I was kind of getting threatened with fines because I'm not sending him into school, and the sort of head of services with the pupil referral units contacted me, and he said, if we make a very special sort of plan for him, would you let him come back? As in, he'd have they'd managed to employ a one-to-one who is a semi-professional footballer. And my son's very sporty and stuff, so I think he'd respond well to someone like that. And he said, we'll give him his own individual timetable, we'll give him like a little office to work in, and are you happy to see how it goes? I said, okay, we'll see how it goes. So we did, and it was okay for a few weeks, and then it all fell apart again. The footballer left, and then they put him on a reduced timetable. And also, I didn't know, but reduced timetables are unlawful as well. But they said, well, we don't know what to do with him, so he can't stay here for the full day. And I was at that point, I was sort of like, I just need to get through this. There's not long of year 6 left. We'll have an EHCP, and he will go to secondary school in year 7, a specialist school, and it will be all right. But that wasn't the case. And then I appealed. So because the governors decided to uphold the head teacher's decision with the permanent exclusion, the next step is the independent review panel.
Right.
So then I took it there, but at this point I've got legal help, so I had a solicitor. Okay. So we went there, and the independent review panel actually said the same thing, that this exclusion is totally unlawful, it is totally wrong. A lot of failings within the school came out there, like their policies were out of date, they'd lied a lot. It was actually really difficult to sit there and listen without just butting in and having to speak because they were lying. And it's like, I know the truth, but I got to try and prove it.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, so the outcome of that was, the decision was to advise the school to remove the permanent exclusion off his record, and overturn it, basically. And at this point, it was the summer. So I said, I'm not even doing this now because I want him to come back to your school, because there's actually no point.
No.
And the way you've treated him, do I even want him there? You clearly don't want him there. But I was so determined to make a point that this was wrong, and I don't want this on his record. And going forward, I don't want this to happen to other children in your school, because he's not going to be a unique case. There'll be other kids like him. And they still justified their actions and upheld the head's decision. And the independent review panel actually ordered the school. They said, you either remove the exclusion, or you're going to lose £4,000 of your budget. And they chose to lose £4,000 of their budget.
Seriously?
Yeah.
It never get lifted?
No, it did, because then I took it to court. I just wasn't willing to drop it.
But seriously, right? And this is a massive simplification of what you've just said, right? But what I've heard is a whole lot of horrendous stress for you and your son and your family. What has been a massive detrimental knock to your son's mental health and his education, which has missed out on a lot. You've missed out on a lot, personally and professionally, when actually, if right at the very beginning they'd have applied for this one-to-one and given him that, there would have been no going to the Board of Governors, there would have been none of the other stuff.
No Prue,
He would have got everything that he needed right there. He wouldn't have missed out on education. You wouldn't have missed out on jobs. There would have been God knows how many thousands spent on court cases and all the rest of it. None of that would have happened.
Yeah.
It is insane to me that this is, how our system works for the children that really need the help, and the parents that are doing everything they can to get it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a total mess of a system. The fact it took a whole year, it actually became like a full-time job for me fighting this, because I thought even if I did have a job, even if I didn't have to stop working when I did at the beginning of year six, I'd have had to have stopped by now, because it was constant phone calls, emails, chasing things, doing this, doing that, and I was like, this is a job. And then when I got the solicitor, it did become a little bit easier, because they obviously take over like sorting the evidence and all of that. But it's still a lot of meetings, and I just didn't think that it could take over my life in the way that it did. Yeah, it was really, really tough. And I didn't even add in there, he also then got diagnosed with autism and tics as well. So he obviously had those things, but it took longer to get
Yeah,
those diagnoses because of waiting lists and all of that. But yeah, he's got so then we got to the end of year six in the Peru, and they wanted to keep him there for secondary school. And I was like, this is never going to happen. If I have to homeschool him, I'll homeschool him, but he's not staying here. We got the EHCP, and I said to the local authority, actually, I want him in a specialist provision, because the mainstream secondary school I'd applied for, I spoke to the Senko, and reading through the EHCP, she was honest. She said we wouldn't be able to meet his needs here. It's a big school. He'd find it very overwhelming, and he'd be very anxious and all of that. That's fine. So the local authority found one specialist secondary school, so I didn't have like a choice to, look around and all of that. So it seemed okay. Went with that one. Had a meeting with the head teacher and all of that, and it was it seemed like a good school.
Yeah.
And then over the summer, the head teacher changed. So by the time he started in September, it was a new head teacher. Sorry to say, awful person. And the school were actually abusing him amongst other children. And he stayed there from September to January. It took me that long for someone to listen to me and say, actually, there's safeguarding issues going on in this school.
Right.
And so again, it was like this. It felt like this battle's just never going to end. When you think, right, they've got an EHCP, we've got a specialist school that could meet his needs, and again, things were just going from bad to worse. Yeah, so it was a lot of shouting to the local authority for them to then finally do whatever they have to do, and he got taken out of there in January. So then from January this year he's in school. He started school in September now, but he had no school for however, what is that, 9 months, 8-9 months. And then obviously before that, year six was messed up because he was in and out of the Peru and all of that. It was a mess. And the time that he'd been home from January to September, again, he just declined massively because he's almost teenage boy, no school, no proper routine.
It's gonna take a massive toll on his social skills as well, because if I can talk from experience a little bit because of lockdown. I mean, I've always sort of struggled really bad with high anxiety anyway, and I don't like traveling, and there's lots of things that I really, really struggle with, but actually that got a lot worse because of lockdown, because we were in all the time. And actually, I've become more insular during lockdown, and my circle has shrunk considerably, and my world has become quite small. Like, I've just started only this last month that I've just really started to push myself to, and I'm an adult. I'm bipolar, and I have my own struggles. When I'm an adult that struggles with these things, and it's taken me a really long time to push myself out of that comfort zone after being isolated. So for a young adult who's going to be not only struggling with hormones and the general that comes with growing up, but also the other stuff as well that he's got going on, to be isolated for that long is going to be incredibly impactful, and it must be really difficult to watch that. It must be absolutely heartbreaking and soul destroying.
Yeah, it was awful, really hard. And then it's just like another fight, because now I'm fighting the local authority, right? You have a legal obligation to educate my child, and you've left him out of education through no fault of his own, because he was in a school where he was being abused. So it's not even that they permanently excluded him. He couldn't go back to that school because it wasn't safe for him. And again, the process, and I'm saying to them, he's got an EHCP, he's got funding, we can do something. So then I was fighting for therapy for him, because can we do something to prepare him so when he does go back to school, because he's going to have a lot of school trauma now with all that's been on top of all his, you know, autism, ADHD, tics that have taken a long time to diagnose. And then there was issues with CAMS and doctors, and then, you know, there was no one. I'm asking for medication review, they're telling me they've got no doctors, so he was off meds. I mean, I didn't even say that. When did I put him on? I ended up putting him on medication about a year or so after he got diagnosed, because I saw that the you know, things were getting bad, and like, we got to try something. And it helps to an extent with his focus and concentration and things like that, but then it takes time to get the medication right, the right dose, what works for him. You've got to tweak it, and the doctors kept leaving. So then it's like, well, now it's an absolute mess of a situation. And then whilst he was at home during these last few months, I think this year has been so difficult. Then he's wanting to go out, obviously, because he's older and he's got friends in the area, and he, without going into too much detail, but he's vulnerable and he was at risk of grooming, and I could see like this is only going to go one way. So then I'm asking social services, can you help? Is there anywhere he can go? You know, and I was struggling to deal with him at home. He's a big boy. You know, he's a similar size to me, so when he is having his outbursts, it's hard for me to deal with that on my own. And then obviously, it's the mental impact that it has on you. But I feel like the only way I've really got through all of this was through having a different focus. So it's like, all right, they've forced me to stop working, so what else can I do? You know, I was really focused on my self-development journey and my own healing throughout this process. And that's when I did like a coaching course, because I thought, okay, I'm at home now, I'm not at work, I want to use that time, while I'm not using it fighting for him and speaking to professionals and doing all that, I will, you know, I've got something else to focus on. And it doesn't mean that he's still not kicking off or doing whatever he's doing. I still have to, you know, I don't have a magic wand to stop him doing those things. But it was like building on my resilience, and how do I keep challenging these people, fighting them, being his voice and speaking in meetings and all of that. And it was really through coaching and development, you know, I invested like money into myself, into programs, and I think that's why now I'm just passionate to try and help other people, because I wouldn't have been able to come and like speak to you and tell people about my story. You know, it's really like made me grow as a person. And I also managed to go to Parliament. They invited me to speak on inclusions and alternative provisions for SEND pupils.
Right.
So it was just sharing my story as a rather, because it was all professionals and teachers and stuff that were giving their story. So it was to have a you know, like a parent that's actually been through it and just speaking on his story and things like that. So there's been like a lot on this journey, but it's been tough.
I think you're an absolute inspiration, to be honest. And I'm sure that what you've actually spoken about in the last 30 minutes is not really even a patch of what you've been through. I mean, you've probably only brushed over a lot of what's happened, and that's without even the consideration of what goes on privately behind your closed doors when you're dealing with your day-to-day. And I think the fact that you really want to use that, what you've been through, to help other people. I mean, there are so many people out there that are dealing with these issues that just don't have the resources. And I think your background working in the Young Offenders Centre definitely gave you a little bit more insight, that probably gave you just enough or more knowledge than you would have had otherwise, to know that that was not a road that you wanted to go down with your child. And I think there are a lot of people out there that don't have that knowledge, that wouldn't even know when to start. And if it isn't for people like you speaking out and talking about their story and being approachable for people that are in the same situation, it's life-changing for people that maybe have got maybe you've got more than one child in their household that, you know, have day-to-day issues, and they don't have the time to do what you've done or the support or whatever. So I think it's so important that you shout your story as loud as you possibly can, and I'm glad that you chose to come and talk to me about it.
Thank you.
I was going to ask you about what's inspired you, but I think we've just been through that. So imagine in a world where neurodiversity is understood and celebrated. How would that have changed your life? How would if the schools were, you know, if it was part of every day, because it is part of every day, there are children in every single school that face challenges, but they're being ignored and it's not being dealt with. And that's not all schools. I'm not saying it's all schools.
Yeah.
There are schools out there that are really good, but there are some that are very clearly failing. How would your life have looked, or how different would your life look if it was just a regular thing, like, you know, colorblind, or, you know, whatever, just people just accept as an everyday, day to day?
Yeah.
What does it look like? How much different would it be?
Yeah, I think that that's where the problem is, because you can't see it. It's not a physical disability, but it is still, you know, but that people, because people put it down to bad behavior, they're naughty, they're bad. And if they could just have a little bit of understanding that actually they don't mean to be that way, their brain works differently to other people's brains, and that's okay. And if schools could have that understanding and training and knowledge, they wouldn't be so quick to say, oh, he didn't finish his work today, so you're not going to go out and play at lunchtime, because you're actually making the problem worse, because kids with ADHD need to get rid of that energy. And making them sit in the head teacher's office for the whole day as a punishment isn't going to work. I think our lives would have been so much different. Like, he wouldn't have had such an interrupted education. Like, he is in a good school now, but I had to fight really hard to get him there. You know, not every day's great. He still has good days, bad days. I've got a meeting coming up to find out actually where is he at with his education, because I don't think he would be at a year 8 standard now, because it's been so disruptive. So I think how can I answer your question, like, in a nutshell?
Well, just, I mean, I guess I'm more, how different would life be for him, and how different would life be for you? What would
So
it
for
like that was much more accepting and open and understanding and patient?
I think we'd be more included. He'd be included in school, be allowed to go on trips. He wouldn't have been taken out of school. He'd have just had that support put in place, and I'd have been able to, you know, work or do whatever I wanted to do my day-to-day normally, without having that anxiety, like, oh my God, the phone's going to ring, they're going to ask me to pick him up, or kind of the way that also staff speak to parents, rather than it being quite rude and intimidating, like, well, your child did this and you're bad, and it would just be accepted. Well, we understand he's got autism, for example, so he doesn't always understand facial expressions properly, so he might get up, you know, think he misinterprets things. Like, he might think, for example, if my face is neutral, he'll be like, mum, why are you angry, you know. Just having that understanding, it would just make us feel like it's included, because you do get excluded from things, or you get parents that want to fight you in the playground because they're like, well, your son did this to my son. And it's like, if you had that little understanding, you're not going to see him labeled as a bully. You're going to see that he's a child with needs, and they clearly were not being met in school.
It's infuriating, because I think if the right level of care was there, and the right level of patience and knowledge, because most of the time it's people are scared of what they don't know, and if they don't understand something, their instant reaction is fear and to step away. And it's almost and as simple as saying, if he was getting the right care to start with, then none of this other stuff would even be an issue, because you know, I think our education system is massively flawed, and it's not a subject that I want to massively speak about, because I think the fact that we group people in ages with no respect for how best they learn, or actually where they are in the learning scale, but we assume that because everybody's 12, they're exactly the same level and they learn. It's flawed. It's incredibly flawed. And I think that it's an archaic system that was put together however long ago, whatever, when people started going to school, and it's never changed, and things are very different now, and it needs revising. And actually, if you've got children that start to get a little bit disruptive when they've been sat still for so long, give them extra breaks, you know, encourage them to do something that's active, that's going to burn off their energy really quickly in 15 minutes, and then sit them back down and start again. Why should children have regular breaks? Why do they have to have 15-minute break in the morning, if they even still do? I don't know. I've been out of education for a really long time. And then an hour for lunch, and then another bit of a break in the afternoon. No, that doesn't work anymore. There'd be better, I think. what is it? I when I'm working, I do around about an hour solid work, and then I get up and I wander around for 10 or 15 minutes, because it makes you much more productive. It makes you take on information much better, rather than sitting solidly for hours and hours and hours doing one thing. And you just think the education system, I think it's flawed for children that don't have challenges, let alone for children that do.
Yeah.
It baffles me. I'm just one crusading woman that thinks that it needs to be looked at, but
No, I agree with you.
it's just all wrong. It doesn't work, and there needs to be a massive change, and I do feel really passionately about it. So okay, what if you could give one piece of advice to other parents that are out there that kind of are stuck in this perpetual loop of school phoning them, having to go and get their child, and then fighting to get them back into school? Or what would you say? What would, I mean, there isn't one piece of advice. I'm not saying that kind of, it isn't that kind of situation, but if there was one thing that you could say to parents that are in this situation, what would it be? What would you sort of
I would say, like, just don't give up. Don't just, no, I'm not saying that they would give up on their child. I mean, don't give up with fighting and pushing and challenging at every stage that, you know, that you feel like something isn't right. Because in the beginning, I would keep quiet about things. You know, I'd say, oh, well, yeah, I'd tell him off, like, you shouldn't have done that, and side with the teachers. But I think what I've learned now is, instead of doing that, if I even have an inkling, like, well, actually, I don't really agree with the way that you know, stopped him going out for lunch or break time or whatever, just challenge it. And even if, you know, if they're calling you and saying, oh, come and pick them up and things like that, like, are they doing it lawfully? Because a lot of these things schools are doing unlawfully, because we don't know any different. Like, it's only because of people I've met on my journey, and getting a solicitor and having like a really good relationship with the CAMS teacher who was really knowledgeable, and just learning from other people, that it's like, they've been mugging me off and I didn't even know. So every time the school calls you and says, oh, come and pick your child up, and, you know, I would be like, oh God, I've got to rush to the school and blah blah blah, get him. I didn't have to do that. And they weren't, because they were not doing it formally. So if they're telling you pick your child up, you need like a letter to say, we've excluded him or her for this amount of time, and they can come back at this time. But they don't do that. So they do it all off the record, you know. Oh, it was only a few hours, only 2 hours left of the day or whatever. But then that's an unlawful exclusion, and I didn't know that. So yeah, I'd say just keep pushing, even when they don't want to give you an EHCP. Even the local authority are telling you, oh, there's no school they can go to. No, but your child has a legal right to be in school, and they have a duty to provide these things. So just don't keep quiet. Keep going.
Keep going. And are there, I mean, obviously, I'm gonna pop this on YouTube and then post it across social media as well. But are there some links that I could get off you that we can maybe attach to this video, where people can, you know, like find, because there's a lot of conflict. One of the things out there in the whole World Wide Web thing is that there is a lot of conflicting information. If you, sometimes you can not look enough, but you can also look too much. You know, like, oh God, I've got a headache, I'm going to go on the internet, and before you know it, you've got a brain.
Yeah, you think you're dying
To live. So there's a lot of information out there, and, you know, some of it is quite scary information, some of it's really incorrect. Are there like a couple of links that I can get off you, you know, just to sort of give people a bit of a start of where to start, and obviously a link to you if anybody out for, you know, a bit of a chat and some advice? Or
yeah, definitely, I'll send you over, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but there is a guidance for exclusions, and it does mention in there first, like, send children. So actually just telling a parent to come and pick their child up just based on the fact that they've got send, that you can't do that, but obviously they do that. Because why would you, I mean, unless you work in education, why would you know this stuff? You know, we don't know. And I think they know that we don't know. So they even at one point tried to off roll him. So when we had a meeting, so that means that they were trying to basically get him off their role, and they're not allowed to do that. So when I was trying to get him back into mainstream and out of the PRU before they excluded him, they actually called me in for a meeting and said, could you call up the local authority and find out what other primary schools have places and then get him sent there instead? But they didn't say it like that. They said it in a way like, because we think it's best for him, blah, blah, blah. And then I found out actually you were trying to off-roll him, and you're not allowed to do that either. And if they did want to do that, I think it's called a managed move, and it's something that like they would have to sort out. You don't tell a parent, go and call the local authority and find a new school.
Right. So just simply passing the buck a lot.
A lot, yeah. But with taking them to court under disability discrimination, and the senior leadership actually left. I don't know why, but their school's got a new head teacher now, and it's what kind of the main thing that came out of all of this was, yes, he didn't go back to the school, but he no longer has it on his record, and all the send policies in the school have now been changed. Right. And practices and the way that they actually deal with parents, not deal with children, of course, but also deal with the parents, because we are forgotten about in all of this, and the stress and anxiety they cause. And also they are giving the teachers and the staff like training now on different like ADHD and autism and things like that, because I think they were lacking in their training.
I think as well they need some seriously intensive training on how to recognize these issues.
Yeah.
The difference between children that are struggling. I mean, I was diagnosed with bipolar quite a long time ago, but prior to that I was diagnosed with other things. And I didn't tell anybody I was bipolar until about 4 years ago. I kept it to myself, but they put me on all sorts of wrong medication because people either want to fob you off or they're just not really interested to dig deep enough to find out exactly what's really going on. It needs to start at a much younger age for people, and our children are in schools where we are leaving somebody else, that we're leaving them in somebody else's care who are responsible for them. They should be trained to understand and know what to look out for. And then if they can't deal with it, say that you can't deal with it, but don't try and fob it off, it's work around it or work with people or bring people in or have one appointed person in the school that is fully trained, I know it's not that much. I know it's not that easy. I do appreciate that. But also there are a lot more children coming through that have got neurodivergent issues. And it is becoming much more commonplace now. And then in which case it should be much less unusual and much more day to day. So there's, do you know, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense because it is very common, and they definitely, I think it's just a lack of awareness. I think that a lot of people still think ADHD is just naughty kids. I don't think they fully understand how it works, and and I think that they should focus more in schools with teachers and giving them training on these things, because there's probably a lot of children in the school that have it, but the staff don't really know how to manage it, or even if they haven't been diagnosed yet. Like, what would have helped us massively is if somebody, when he was in reception or year one, or a teacher then would have said, why don't we do a referral, because this behavior is not quite normal. Calling me in every day is not solving the problem. I don't know what their expectation of me was. I get that they've got to tell me and all of that, but the fact that I had to get him referred, and it's just like, had I not have been proactive and done all of this, then I don't know where we'd be right now.
No, well, thank goodness that your son, that you have spoke out in your son's voice, and that I am 1,000,000% positive that you will go on to help lots and lots of people through a really similar journey. I'm gonna start wrapping this up now, because obviously I appreciate that we've been nearly chatting for an hour now. So just one final plug for your book, which is coming out when? Or the book
co-author. I believe it's coming out end of November. So once it's out, and I've got a link for it, I can post the link. It's called Turn Your Mess Into Your Message.
Fabulous. And people can find you at Coach, is it .Zahra or _?
Dot, yeah.
And it's Zahra spelled Zahra.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, I want to say a massive thank you for coming and talking to me today, and I'm sure that keep going over this story must be quite, I wouldn't say distressing, but it must be quite painful to keep reliving what you've been through, what your son's been through. So I really do appreciate you talking to me about that.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
No, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I think that you are going to be incredibly valuable and important to a lot of people in the future when you go out and you start sort of helping people through this very similar journey that you've been on. I think it'll be life-changing for a lot of people. So thank you for that.
I hope so. Thank you.
And I will say goodbye for now, and have a really good afternoon.
You too.
Thank you for being on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem.